Today, we explore Tanium's new support for containers in the cloud. Welcome back to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone. And most people use Tanium on Windows, Mac, and Linux endpoints, but we're adding containers to that list. Recently, at our Converge conference, we announced an effort called Endpoint Expansion, where we're extending the benefits of Tanium to new kinds of devices. So today, we get to find out about the first step in that journey. So help me welcome Tricia for her first time on the show. So Tricia, please introduce yourself for our viewers.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm thrilled to be here. I've been with Tanium for about 8.5 years now. Most of that time I spent working with Trends, Console, Interact, but currently I am the technical product manager for Cloud Workloads.
So Tricia, welcome to the show today. So what's the problem that we're solving with Cloud Workloads?
Yeah, so a few years ago, we released the Tanium container solution to provide visibility for containerized environments, and the increased visibility was well received. But once we started getting more feedback, we realized that we were missing a lot of great use cases. And we really needed to go back to the drawing board and create a brand new solution that's more user-friendly and more robust to allow our customers to be able to, see and manage their containerized environments.
So a lot of the features that people appreciate today on those traditional endpoints, we're kind of bringing some of that. I have to guess, do we run an agent on the container or the host, or how does that work?
So they'll have to deploy a client to the one node per cluster in order to get that visibility. So we'll use Kubernetes API to gather that data from the cluster.
So we're running in a Kubernetes environment. It sounds like they kind of rule the world of
Right.
containers. Okay. So
That
we're
is our
going to run.
focus.
Okay. And so we talked about cloud workloads. We're talking about containers. Is this for only cloud containers? If I've got some containers on-prem, will that work as well?
Yes, this will work for on-prem, self-hosted containers or cloud containers, whether it's a managed orchestrator or an unmanaged orchestrator.
I've got to have some kind of a Tanium agent on one node in the cluster. So I've got to guess that's probably not going to be all the traditional Tanium modules that we come to expect, like patch and deploy and threat response and all that. So I'm curious, what kinds of capabilities are we introducing here?
So we're going to have integrations with Interact and reporting, like you would expect with all of our other modules that have sensors. We're also going to have an interaction or an integration, I should say, with Asset. You'll be able to see like a full container inventory, SBOM, Enforce. You'll be able to create cluster policies for using Enforce. We also have a way to create a custom policy using Rego. Um, Also, Comply. We'll have an integration with Comply, so you can create vulnerability assessments on container images.
Wow, so that's impressive. Normally, we just start out with kind of an inventory asset kind of thing, but we've got enforce and comply in there as well. That's
Correct.
pretty impressive. So, what kinds of things are we going to do then with the containers?
So we're going to be able to see in the cluster when the container was created, when it started, when it stopped. We're going to be able to see the nodes, the pods, and any enforced policies that are related to the clusters. We're going to be able to flag containers that are running in privilege mode, as well as containers that are rogue. And that's going to be based on, customers setting up their registries in their cloud workloads environment. So if a container is spun up and it's pointing to a registry that they have not configured, then we're going to consider that a rogue container. And you'll easily be able to identify that in Asset.
Wow, and SBOM. I mean, because
Yeah.
typically containers are running applications, so having that SBOM visibility inside a container, I'm just impressed. I do this all the time on the show. I'm a Tanium employee. It sounds like I'm just, bragging about our company, but because when we see things like this, it just really makes me stop and think, wow. So we're looking at a container, at the components within an application running in that container. That's impressive. So Tricia, what does the architecture of this look like? If we're not exactly running a Tanium client, how do we get this data? What's the structure of the components?
So we do have a Tanium client. It's a containerized version of the Tanium client that gets deployed to the cluster. And then we use that to gather the data from the cluster via the Kubernetes API. We also have a Tanium admission controller that gets deployed to the cluster, and that allows us to hook into those admission events so that we can make decisions on whether we want to block or allow changes to the cluster.
And that brings me to my next question, which is around enforce policies. You just, because normally I'm typically in a Windows world and I'm thinking of group policy or something like that. What kinds of policies would you put on containers?
You could block containers from being instantiated based on IP address or tags or the registry they're pointing to, or just because they're rogue. I mean, there's really a lot of possibilities because we also have that custom template that allows them to create their own policy.
And how do we define a rogue container?
So rogue containers are any container that's pointing to a registry that you have not yet configured in Cloud Workloads.
So a cluster node detects, hey, there's somebody else over here, and I'm showing them visibility, but you don't have that one as a defined registry that you're scanning. Is that am I following that right?
Well, it doesn't have to be a scanned registry. It just has to, if there's not a registry that's entered into Cloud Workloads, because some of our registries won't be scanned because they're not supported for scanning, but we want you to enter those anyway so that we can determine whether or not, the containers running are indeed rogue.
Okay. So let's dive into a demo. The more I talk about this, because I'm not a containers first kind of person, I don't have a lot of personal experience there, but I know a lot of our audience is really eager to see this. And so I think it would help me to see a demo. Could you show us, kind of take us in from
Sure.
basic visibility and then into comply and force?
Absolutely. So we're looking at the main console page here. I've set up my Cloud Workloads Overview dashboard, which is a managed dashboard that comes with Cloud Workloads out of the box. I've set it up on my home page here so I can easily keep track of what's going on with my containers, as soon as I log in. In the shared services menu item, there's a new Cloud Workloads option. And when you click on that, you're going to have options to set up Cloud Workloads. We don't expect customers to spend a lot of time in the workbench for Cloud Workloads. It's more for getting things set up. So if you had a cluster that you wanted to bring under management, you would select the type of cluster, and then you would generate a YAML file or a Helm chart from here, and then you would take that and deploy that to your clusters to bring it under management. This is also where you're going to add your registries. These are the providers that we support for scanning, and any registries that don't fit into one of these is going to be entered as other, so we can still use that in our determination of whether or not a container is rogue. Once you set up your registries, you can view all of them here and easily see the status of we use satellites to connect to the registries, and you could take a look here and see what the health is of the connection between the satellite and the registry. You can also see the progress of SBOM scans. So like in this example, we found over 75,000 images in this registry, and we've scanned 68,670 at this point. So earlier I mentioned the managed dashboard that comes with Cloud Workloads. So let's take a look at that. It's a very high level overview of your Kubernetes environment. A lot of good information here. And like all of our other dashboards and reporting, you can clone it and make it more specific to your environment. So let's take a look at the comply integration. If you go to comply and then findings, underneath vulnerability, we're going to have a new tab for container images. And you can drill down just like you typically do when you're looking at findings and comply. For example, I'm going to look at the 8 critical vulnerabilities that were found for this particular image hash. And then once you see that information, we have slide outs for each one of the CVEs to get additional information. Once you get the additional information, you can also investigate. And this allows you to see the full file path and CPE that were used to find the vulnerability in the first place.
I'm just thinking of how many layers down we are in the system here, right? So we've got this one node in the cluster is running this specialized Tanium client. Now we're looking at another member of that, or another node next to that one, and now we're looking at a vulnerability scan. And so we're now finding this vulnerability. We're finding that an SBOM detail. We're drilling down just layer after layer. I have to say this is impressive. Just the level of granularity here. Wow.
Yeah, and for, some of the vulnerabilities that are out there, they're hidden in libraries within libraries within libraries. And so having an SBOM is just really important in order to find those. That way you don't have to wait for the provider to figure out where it's hidden and then announce it, maybe a week after it's found. It's a lot faster this way to actually find the problem.
So what I hear you saying there is typically containers hold application workloads. Those applications may be published by a development software company that's reusing third-party components that have a vulnerability notice. And it might
Exactly.
take them a while before they have realized that that vulnerability exists when something they shipped in a container, but we can find it before they even announce it. Wow.
Yeah, pretty incredible. We also have, let's take a look at our enforce integration. If you go to policy configurations, just wanted to point out some of our options that we have. Okay, so in enforce, we have a new platform type, which is Kubernetes. You can see that icon here. And if you select it, then it's going to limit the policies that you see in the dropdown to just the Kubernetes cluster policies that we have available. And all of these are predefined templates. At the bottom, those where you have that option to create a custom OPA policy using Rego. And so you're going to see here's where you can actually enter that in, and then you're going to see that automatic validation happen as you're typing, pointing out the errors and things that you might have. We also have a dry run option, which is really cool because it allows you to see the effect the policy would have without having to actually enforce it in your environment. That's kind of
Wow.
neat.
So this is, can we go back and look at those new
Oh,
policy
sure.
types? I'm really interested to see more of those. There were several of those little policies in there because, again, coming from a Windows world, now I see different kinds of policies here by registry, by IP, host name. So allows and blocks,
Mhm.
blocking rogue containers. This is a nice set of policies just to get started. What do you think are going to be
Yep.
the most popular policy types people would use?
Um, I think blocking images by registry. There's a lot of things that are typical, like blocking things with the latest tag, um, stuff like that are going to be pretty common, I think, amongst most customers,
So
as well as
tagging.
blocking rogue containers. Yeah.
Okay, so how does tagging work with clusters? I'm guessing this is probably not the standard Tanium custom tags we're used to. What is this like
No,
a tag that's in the registry?
these are tags that are added in Kubernetes. Moving on to asset, because we really don't anticipate you're going to spend much time in the Cloud Workload Workbench. We expect that you're going to use these module integrations to actually get the benefit from it. So under asset, there's a new menu item called container details. And we've got 4 reports here out of the box. And I hesitate to call them reports because they're more like interactive pages. They're not like the standard reports that you're used to in asset because you can't do the same, like you can't save them, but they are very interactive. So let's take a look at running containers. So here I'm looking at all the running containers. And like I mentioned, we're flagging rogue containers. So any container that's pointing to a registry that's not configured, you're going to see this bright red icon here. And privileged, that's where you're going to see your containers that are running as privileged. Take a look, and then you can make that determination. Hey, do I need to investigate further? Or is this a known setting and we set it up this way on purpose? You can
So what
also
does
look
that
at it.
mean? Help me. So I'm a novice at containers. So what does privileged mean for a container?
Well, that just means it has elevated privileges and it actually has access to the host system, which is not good. It can invite attackers in to make all kinds of or wreak havoc. It's really not great. It's really frowned upon to set up your containers to run in privilege mode. You can click on any of these links to get additional details. Right now, I'm looking at image details. this particular hash. Looks like it's not running currently as far as it hasn't spun up any containers, but if it had, you would see the details here. So we also have this report for container image inventory, and all of these are going to be pulled from those registries that you've added, you've enabled for scanning. We're going to scan and get a complete inventory of all the images per registry, and that's what's going to show up in this report. And you can display it in different ways. You can display it by registry or images. Each one of these has a slide out so that you can get additional information. So for this particular image name, there are 47 hashes associated with it. And over here in the packages column, this is your SBOM scan. So you can click on that, and this is where you can actually go through all the packages that were found on that image. You can use the typical filter here to narrow the results. But this is something that a lot of the customers have said that is kind of a game changer for Tanium when it comes to containers.
Well, I'm just thinking if I'm a big a company who's really big on application hosting with all these containers running around across all these different services. Now I can pull it in, like you said, one pane of glass. I can pull it all in, and within seconds, I can see this particular latest, say, open source vulnerability that could be hiding at 2, 3, 4 layers deep in some of these
Right.
containers. I would agree with the customer feedback you've seen already that yeah, that is a game changer.
Yep. So we also have a Kubernetes clusters report that's broken up into two sections. We have managed clusters and unmanaged clusters. For the unmanaged clusters, that just means the Tanium client's not running in the cluster. So you can click on the little icon under actions, which is going to allow you to generate that YAML file or Helm chart so that you can bring that cluster under management. And then for the managed clusters, any clusters that are online, their name is going to be a link like you see here. And you can click on that link to get additional information regarding nodes and running pods and any enforced policies that apply specifically to that cluster that you're looking at.
Well,
And of
that's
course,
a
all of
new
these
level
links.
of reporting detail. I've never seen enforced
Yes.
policy data inside of Asset. Wow.
Yeah, it's a really cool feature. And you click on that, it's going to take you straight to the enforcement. And then you can look at the details, the clusters and targeting that's used. So it's really pretty cool, pretty slick.
So you were saying this is a combination of asset reporting, which is usually kind of point in time, but at some point it transitions over to actual live queries, right?
Right. This view here is a result of a live query. So all of this information was pulled from a live query. But a lot of the data is pulled from reporting. So you'll see that information in the reporting reports that are available.
So as we're talking about real-time data, that's Tanium's differentiation point. These are not scanned reports from yesterday. In an ephemeral environment like containers, you need that real-time data. So this is
Mhm.
impressive.
Yep.
Well, thank you for this tour today, Tricia.
No problem. Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun.
So,
But
Tricia, these are amazing capabilities. Thinking about all the different modules that we've got, more than just visibility out of the box here. So, if I'm watching this show and I'm thinking this would be perfect for my container environment, what do I have to do to get this capability in Tanium?
so for cloud customers, it's already available in their environments. They'll need to set up users with the appropriate cloud workloads roles, add trusted registries and deploy the clients to bring clusters under management. But beyond that, it's just a matter of configuring the integration. So if they have comply, they'd have to set up a vulnerability assessment. If they wanted to use enforce, they'd have to set up the enforcements. But it should already be available in all their environments right now.
So,
For
all
on-prem,
cloud
it's still a ways
customers.
out.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
sorry.
on-prem will be delivered a little bit later. Cloud should have
Correct.
this already, and so they can just
Right.
go in and start plugging in. I'm guessing there's a good docs page that's going to walk them through all that.
Oh, yes. Very detailed. And for each integration as well. So it's really thorough.
So I go to docs, which are linked in the show notes below, as usual. So I go to docs, it'll walk me through. I get my registries and all that stuff wired in with my settings. And then as far as configuration, is there anything specifically that I need to do there?
Other than deploying the client, not really. I mean, they have the option to configure the how often the registry scans are done. By default, it's every hour. They can change that setting if they'd like to. I should also mention, though, that customers that are currently using our legacy containers content, they should install or uninstall, I should say, the Tanium client container from their nodes. And we have some really good instructions in the container user guide for that. And they'll have to contact support to get the solution uninstalled. So that's something they should
Okay.
keep in mind.
All right. So, as you've been working with this early days with some of our earlier customers, are there is any feedback that you've heard so far from people who've been able to get at this earlier?
Yeah, they're really impressed with the added integrations and the capabilities and the user friendliness. Of course, there are use cases they would like to see us add, and we're working on that. We really owe it to our customers because without their valuable feedback from our old solution, we wouldn't have been able to come up with this more robust, user-friendly solution.
And are there any like frequently asked questions or best practices, things that you typically hear from people? It's like, hey, I thought I thought I set it all up right, and I'm not getting what I expected. Is there some like frequently asked questions, things that where are the places that people frequently make a mistake in their configs or anything?
Well, I would say with this first release, just make sure your registry connection is working and it's successful. Don't just assume that it's going to be, correct every time. But also pick more than one satellite if you have more than one satellite available for your registries, because that's going to spread the workload out and just make those inventory scans and SBOMs just much more efficient.
Oh, so can I have multiple nodes within a cluster that have that are operating as a satellite?
You're going to use satellites that, I mean, most customers already have satellites configured. You can use your existing satellites or you can set up brand new satellites, but you can set up more than one. We do recommend that they be dedicated to cloud workloads if possible. Don't have to be, but there's a lot of processing that goes on. So we do recommend that. But the more you add, the more the workload is spread out and the more efficient it's going to be.
So I've got a Tanium client that's been set up as a satellite, and that satellite is then going to talk to the cluster node that has the special container client. Is that how it works?
It's just going to connect to the registries
Ah,
and do
okay.
scans for the registries, right?
Okay.
And the
So
SBOMs. The satellites will also do the SBOMs for the images.
very nice. So what are the next features that are coming along?
Well, we are working on expanding the core capabilities, like additional registry support for scanning and authentication types. We're also working on rogue exports, which is a really cool feature. So if a customer has an S3 bucket or an Azure Blob Store, then they'll have the option of enabling exporting rogue images. So if a container gets spun up and we detect that it's a rogue container, then we can automatically export that image so that they can investigate it in the future if necessary. Assuming we catch it before it goes offline. They're so ephemeral sometimes it's hard to catch them, but that's a pretty cool feature that we're working on. We're also looking at expanding our module integrations. So like compliance benchmark scanning for orchestrators and hosts. If customers are using a cloud managed orchestrator, it's likely already baked into their cloud capabilities, but it becomes really important if they're self-hosting because there's no native tool right now that lets them do those kinds of scans for Kubernetes.
One question I just thought of was, what really differentiates Tanium here from other, cloud container type management solutions?
Just the single pane of glass is going to be a really big win for them if they're already using Tanium and a lot of the features. Um, right now, we want to complement existing tools for containerized environments. We're not trying to replace them at this point, but we think that having all of this in a single pane of glass is really going to be beneficial.
So we're not hosting containers at all. What we're doing is kind of auditing to make sure, like you said, there's no rogue containers or maybe long running or infected, some type of compliance benchmark that turns up. I guess when it comes to comply, maybe that's a good question. So is it like configuration compliance or vulnerability compliance that we're looking at?
Right now, right now we're just doing vulnerability assessments on images.
So if I see a CVE present inside of a container, it'll flag me and comply.
Absolutely, yes.
Wow. That's great. So I think as I'm just trying to take all this in, again, I apologize. I'm not a native cloud container person, but as I'm taking this in, I'm realizing we're getting a lot of data here with, like you said, real time queries that we saw in the demo from things that don't all run a Tanium client. That's kind of new territory for Tanium, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Absolutely. Yep.
Tricia, thank you for this demo and little tour today of what we get to do with containers now on the Tanium platform. So obviously this is a big area for lots of our customers, a big ask from a lot of them. We're able to respond to that now. So for those of you who are watching, again, check out the docs link in the show notes below, and there'll be more documentation, articles, so forth coming down the road. But so start with that docs link below. There's the walkthrough, very detailed instructions to get you started there. And then just test it out and let us know what you think. As Tricia said earlier, Tanium relies on your feedback as customers to make sure that we're delivering what's important to you. So if you see some things, maybe some other providers, some things that would be important to you, please let us know through whatever Tanium channels that you normally communicate with. And as always, you can start some conversations out in our Tanium community discussion board and work on your Titans badges and getting some questions and answers going out there as well. So thank you for joining us for today's episode of Tanium Tech Talks. Until next time, go Tanium.